It's a great pleasure to welcome to our 2025 Online Trend Summit longtime collaborator of the Food People, Amelia Boothman. Amelia brings her specialism in social science and psychology and semiotics to understand the cultural forces and the consumer trends to inform and inspire brand and innovation strategy. As you can all see, I'm also joined by Shakufa Hijazi, Food People's Head of Insight. So welcome, Amelia. Welcome, Shakufa.
Thank you. Lovely to join you again this year. Thank you for having me back.
Can't wait to get started on this one.
I know, this is an exciting one. Amelia is going to bring to life the cultural driving forces and more of, I guess, the human narrative behind the top trends for 26-27. And as we go through them, Shakufa and I will help sort of unpack those trends in a little bit more detail, if it's okay with you, Amelia, by asking a few questions and just to kind of get under the skin of these a little bit more detail, if that's all right.
Yes, I love a bit of debate around these.
That's great. Just a note to participants, if you're joining today as a Trend Hub Enterprise or Trend Hub Premium subscriber, you can immerse in all of the detail behind this keynote with the supporting presentations and the videos of the 26-27 social and cultural trend predictions on Trend Hub. That's all available from today. So I think, Amelia, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you and let's unpack some of those driving forces of behaviour. They're at the root of the different trend manifestations as we move into 26-27.
Super. Thank you, Charles. I thought we could start off by just having a little bit of an introduction on why we focus on these cultural trends and how they differ and how this is really useful when designing the different offers that all of your lovely subscribers deliver. So why is it so important? And essentially, it's really because the trends don't come alive just in terms of what you're giving them, but it's how you do it, how you cue what they're looking for visually, verbally, through atmosphere, through experience, all the different cultural stories. And it's really this context that helps deliver what it is that they're looking for and really delivers the benefit in the subconscious that is the need underneath. And these are the subconscious messages that can then be used to help inform communications, menu design, pack design, decor, atmosphere, etc. So everything about the experience. And I've typified it by giving this example of the honest, simple sandwich, which in fact, on the far left, you can see here a classic design of a ham sandwich, which might be one that you'd get in a basic cafe or in a supermarket's essentials range. And it's just the bread and the ham. And then you've got a really interesting example here with Poppins, which is actually a craft bakery, like a gourmet bakery. And so it's still just a humble sandwich, but not really, because in fact, the ingredients are more valued, the bread's more valued. There'll be stories around those. For example, this one at Poppins, they talk about things like the San Marzano tomatoes and zesty ricotta in it. So they're really beginning to hero the ingredients. And then finally, Quo Vadis, which is more of a premium dining experience. Here's their smoked eel sandwich. And you can see here how it's elevated even further in fine dining. And so they're all sandwiches, but they're very, very different. And that's what we mean by the sort of semiotic, cultural and social meaning that delivers that perhaps the same thing but differently, and that's what we're really drawing out here. I'll just then go on to quickly explain how it works and why these social and cultural trends are delivering the sort of meaning and the value. What is it that we do to give it integrity instead of just sort of musing over this? So we actually use social anthropology to analyze these great food and beverage trends that you guys at the Food People discover. And we create the semiotic themes of culture and society behind them by looking back at where these are rooted in the society and culture globally. and we draw those together and then create the overarching macro cultural and social drivers. And just to explain that further visually, you can see here how we have understood what the big 4 cultural themes are this year: future resilience, having fun, back to basics, strengthen and streamline, or streamline and strengthen. And these all form our global driver of my new reality. And underneath those are the cultural driving forces. So under each one of those is cultural driving forces that we have analysed and discovered to then bring together those big themes. And so today what we're going to do is we're going to give you some highlights of what those are. And we're going to show you by example how we draw together those themes underneath, say, having fun. We're going to have a look at comfort rules, snack attack, and these are the food and beverage trends that you are talking about. But underneath those, we've identified these cultural driving forces that then all ladder up to having fun and then my new realities. So yeah, that's a little journey we're going to go on now and discuss what we've seen socially and culturally. And so without further ado,
let's dive in.
Shall we kick off and have a look at that central drive, the global one right in the middle there? So my new reality. So I know that you're talking about this in food trends talk. You've just introduced it to us, and so let's have a look at what is behind that, because we've got those pressures you've talked about in terms of the cost of living and the uncertainty politically, as well as technology now moving so fast with AI. And so the my new reality is where people are looking for ways to help them adapt to this new reality. And food has a number of ways that it can respond. It can be therapeutic, if you like, because change is quite stressful. And also it can be really good at offering distraction as well, to take me away from that stress. And they're wanting obviously ways to help them that are novel and practical, but also take them away into the joyful escapism. The back to basics part of the story is about offering meaningful, good value approaches to this that are taking us back to where culture and society gives us comfort. So we'll look at that. Then the artificial intelligence is really helping to sort of superpower the change, and it's giving us opportunities as well as challenges. We'll go into those. Health, again, we always see this front and center, but in the new world order with AI, we're beginning to see things we didn't know before about ourselves, about our health spans and living longer and better. And so again, we're redefining those meanings of what it means to say to be overweight and trying to manage your appetite and diet. So we'll look at that as well. And the same thing with sustainability, with the new advances, but also the squeeze financially. We can see that sustainability has been recalibrated and becoming something that we can celebrate and incorporate into business and culture, rather than see it as something of restraint and almost a niche thing that sort of extremists follow. It's actually really interesting how it's becoming incorporated. So that's all why it's becoming a sort of my new reality with these driving forces behind it.
Super insightful, Amelia. Thank you. And I think we're going to explore then some of the segments that sort of make up this my new reality driver in a bit more detail.
Great. Yeah. So shall we start off with having fun?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. So having fun. So we are seeing, because of these global drivers, that cultural norms are being broken down and culinary traditions with those. And obviously this we've seen over a period of time as well. This isn't brand new. but the escapist therapy that we're looking for now is coming to the fore even more, and antiquated rules are being recalibrated so we can now look to eat what we want and when we want and how we want it. We still need things to feel like they're culturally relevant. We don't want them to come in from left field and not understand them. But if we can playfully merge formats and redefine our meal times, and also snackification almost replace meal times, then they can offer this sense of fun if we can create these new playful meanings, and we can allow ourselves to enjoy them because we have these primal needs, if you like, that we'll go into in a minute, that give us comfort through hedonistic delivery of things we love. And so we're seeing this exploration continue that we've seen over recent years. We've obviously seen swavery, swalty and swaur, and we're wanting the sweet treat therapy to continue. It doesn't, we're not moving away from that. But the pure comfort indulgence becoming accessible is giving it a sort of credibility. And in straitened times, we're allowing ourselves to do this more rather than feeling guilty about it. And also, we're still looking for good old-fashioned nights out. It doesn't just have to be in the home. It's interesting that we see that people are still, even in straitened times, going out and enjoying snack tales, interestingly, and happy meals and these sorts of things, because they're needing to get that respite from the sort of tough changes that are going on out there. Shall we have a little look at the first of our driving forces behind?
Yeah, let's do that. I think this is a really interesting one, the first one. Comfort. I mean, Shakira and I had a great conversation about this earlier on from a sort of really culinary perspective. Feels like the gift that keeps on giving almost. Comfort. It works in good times. It also works in not so good times as well. It feels like it's quite universal. When you come at it from different through different perspectives, it offers a kind of a new dimension. I suppose the question really is looking through the lens of the next sort of 2-year horizon, 26, 27, from that more sort of human and cultural perspective. What is it? And you started to touch on it, but I just wondered if you sort of elaborate a little bit more. Why do you think comfort is becoming even more relevant over time?
It's really interesting because we haven't seen, as you've said in your introductory explanation of the trends, that there isn't really any let up on the standards of living, the credit crunch, digital overload continues. So that pressure to find an outlet is still growing. And I think that's really driving it in this sort of world of uncertainty and change. And we're therefore really needing more soothing activities, more things that are sort of aesthetically comforting, philosophically comforting, really playing to the sort of Maslow's basic needs. And so we're seeing more things happen globally, like adult summer camps. The concept of Danish hygge has been around for a while, or even the Finnish concept of pantstrunk. I love that word. It's so great, isn't it? Pantstrunk, which is about relaxing at home in underwear, which sounds fabulous. And we've known for a while through Epicurean philosophy that actually appreciation of the simple things and this cocooning element is really important. And we've seen in media this comforting theme with a lot of programs. We've obviously had the Great British Bake Off go global, and that's been around a while. But this phenomenon of cozy fantasies, cozy detective dramas, really safe narratives, so people can sit at home and feel comforted and safe is really happening. And we had, obviously, post-COVID, a lot of quiet quitting, the great resignation, hustle culture really being pushed to the back, and relentless ambition continuing to be pushed to the back because people want more mindful lives. Meditation apps has grown into $1 billion industry. And this pursuit of inner comfort to help me deal with these times of change is not going away and is continuing to grow really strongly. We're looking for these sort of predictable, safe environments and a sense of control. And of course, food is perhaps one of the best examples of this. So accessible and affordable in the context of other more expensive things like holidays or new comfy furniture. You can go out and buy something that's really accessible, value for money.
Yeah, definitely. Love the kind of connection with food. And Shakifa and I talked about big breakfast, talked about, Americano really plays into this kind of comfort nostalgia. We spoke about bread and the role that bread and battered products are playing in that mix as well. So yeah, no, that's super insightful. Do you mind if perhaps we talk about another dimension that is actually sits within this the mega trend around sort of snacking and sort of mini meals, if that's possible. I think we've seen sort of snacks and mini meals almost evolve into being the meals themselves, and snacks having to have the same sort of form and stature as meals themselves, but at the same time being small and fun and rewarding, and sometimes functional and power packed all at the same time. How is snacking evolving from at a kind of behavioural level, do you see?
Yeah, I find this one particularly fascinating because we've been brought up to think that snacks are bad. They're almost like a moral faux pas, if you like, and that one should be ashamed of snacking. But actually, for thousands of years prior to industrialization, we foraged, we snacked essentially. So snacking is embedded, it's almost like a biological echo, if you like, in the human psyche. And so snack culture is now becoming more embedded into our lives because it fits almost our new evolutionary tempo. So the idea of sort of 3 square meals fitted really well around the structured week we used to have: breakfast, lunch, and dinner, when we had sort of set industrial factory times. And really it's been blown out of the water by the modern rhythm of life, shift work, digital connectivity, allowing global time zones to become merged, solo living. So it means traditional meal times don't really work. And in fact, it's quite adaptive. It's really the human rhythm. It's opportunistic. It's about being curious and alive to the moment, embracing snacking. And it's really about a sort of modern way of thinking. So it's not really a discipline failure. It's actually an adaptation to fragmented schedules. So foods that are easy and quick or one-handed, allow you to multitask, we should rethink about them almost as survival tools, smart survival tools, clever survival tools that fit our lives, rather than allowing mealtimes to almost organize us. We organize it to fit that.
That's super interesting, just to get beneath the skin of what we see perhaps more on the surface. From a food and drink perspective, we've got trends like snap, cracker and pop and stick it and fourth meal times and all those types of things, but just to kind of get under the skin of that is super interesting. I think we could talk about the having fun trends forever in a day, and I think it's probably a good time to segue onto the next section, Amelia, if we may.
Okay, so let's have a look at back to basics, and actually sort of sits adjacently to that in many ways. And this again is driven by the financial constraints. Consumers really are being forced to simplify, think about budgets, look at more honest staples, if you like, foods that give a good bang for their buck and don't compromise on nutrition and joy, but are helping with the time-saving bit and the accessible part as well. And so we're seeing, and we've seen this for a while with the humble vegetables and value cuts, but I think in particular, we're going to talk about in the second, I think the meat and poultry part being re-embraced in a slightly different way. And then seafood's really interesting because that's becoming more democratized. And when it delivers, it's the ones that manage to deliver to all of these elements we were just talking about with snacking, where it's still nutritionally relevant. and you can get a lot from the basics nutritionally, whereas before we used to think that the higher value ones were better in all respects. We're actually reevaluating others to allow them back into our repertoire and beginning to understand how to eat them, because we have to, and thinking of them more as a precious commodity, because they can deliver real substance and real value to my functional needs. It's just we forgot about them, but they have got to deliver to these other basic social needs of prep time, cooking time, in order to get reconsidered.
If I might jump in at this point. I find this one really interesting. We've sort of touched on a bit of this in the top 10 session, didn't we, Charles, about the butcher's cut and people turning to meat, and I asked a pressing question there, which was how does that stack up with sort of declining numbers sometimes we see in meat consumption? I guess I have a similar question for you, Amelia, in the sense that it's hard to ignore in our minds that for years it feels like all we've heard about is all vegan all the time, bleeding burgers and carrots that are somehow magically transformed into salmon and all of these things. What feels different about now that's driving people sort of away from that and into the sort of humble basics, the mince, the chicken thighs, and the value cuts, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, that, isn't it? Because it is very tempting to think that you just want to go for the even cheaper sort of veg side of things, pulses, beans, but actually it's the ability to reconsider and reawaken what we're calling the hearth instinct that's really interesting, because that is very comforting back to the trend we just looked at, and the ability to pull in that hearth instinct of nourishing, but also very comforting and protecting rituals that come from the preparation of meat. We all know that when someone lights a fire or a barbecue and cooks on it, we get this strong sense of sort of reassurance and intimacy, a kind of communal reconnection, if you like. And that goes back again to our ancestral times when we first discovered fire and were able to cook meat, which then makes it more accessible and gives us that sort of primal, potent intimacy, if you like. And the other thing is that we see philosophers talk about this, actually, the Stoics and the Epicureans, where we have rituals and meaning and identity with the preparation of meat and cooking it together. And this gives us a sense of substance. Again, it feels more material, more materially real when we do, which is really lovely. So this idea of it being more grounding and resonant when we appreciate and reevaluate meat and poultry and other things, because it's almost like it's a revolt against hollow virtual worlds that we are now having to live in. And there's a greater density and texture and embodied pleasure in meat that I think we're all really aware of. You get more umami, and you've got this fat, dense flavor, if you like. So cooking meat enables us to trade this sort of simulation virtual world for deeper sensations. It does mean we're having to renegotiate our complex relationship with meat, because of course we've almost made it a baddie in the last recent times because of its sustainability issues, if you like. But in looking at the lesser cuts, of course, that's again reusing what might have been a waste cut and revaluing it. It's also more accessible in a world of rising cuts. And so if we think about the meat in a more thoughtful, deliberate, conscious way, rather than just mass consuming it without any thought, what are we buying? How good is it for us and society in terms of sustainability? And we justify it in our minds. that takes us to a kind of conscious carnivory, if you like, and the way we approach meat. And that's really where it's going now, is that if we think about it in these more thoughtful terms, we can happily reconsider it rather than guiltily eat it.
Yeah, and actually that does really stack up with some of the foodie trends that we're seeing in terms of the meat preparations and presentations, doesn't it, Charles? Because it's a
Absolutely.
lot of, whole pork chops and chicken wings and simple mince being
Yeah.
sort of turned into a haché or a sausage. It's all it's simple, it's visceral almost sometimes, things that have bones and where you use your hands, and it's about, as you said, it's that gathering around the hearth feeling that a lot of those things kind of evoke. And yeah, I do think that's really interesting that that sort of story follows through from the behavior narrative into then how people are cooking the stuff, which is really, really interesting. If you don't mind, can I ask a question about the sort of convenience aspect of Back to Basics as well?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I mean,
I mean, things shifted a little bit in the pandemic and after, around quiet quitting and the great resignation and all of that kind of stuff. And in general, I think it's true there was a bit of a blip around then when it came to convenience as well, because things did really slow down. So people didn't mind as much if things took longer. And actually, we saw things like home baking taking off that by their nature take a bit of time and effort and don't necessarily have convenience at front of mind. But if we take, that era aside, since then, definitely for the last few years at least, it feels like convenience is definitely king. Time is a commodity. That feels almost like a forever trend, I guess, at this point. If we assume, knock on everything, that we don't have a slowdown again in terms of a pandemic, but let's put that aside and just say that, if time remains a commodity that it feels like now, what is new, what's sort of different in the convenience space this year? What's changing? How is it evolving? Where do we see it moving forward?
yeah, and I think this is really interesting because there's a nice parallel with the snackification part of the story as well, in that the idea of convenience again has been a bit of a dirty word or a lazy word, hasn't it? And yet now we're seeing a sort of acceptance of it and an assimilation in it if we do it right. And this takes us back again to really how humanity has developed and emerged over millennia, which is it's a bit of an evolutionary instinct, convenience, because the idea that we need to conserve energy and maximize the outcome is what we've done as we've evolved, using fire, using tools, etc., in the sort of thousands of years past, is really just a lovely parallel for meal kits and delivery apps and microwaves, if you like. The culture actually is constantly driving forwards with intelligent adaptations that are honed to make us more efficient. So it's not really an indulgence, it's a survival strategy. And with the accelerated life rhythms that we're actually seeing now through technology, it's now becoming more accepted, and it's not really about laziness anymore. We're kind of giving up this idea that we shouldn't be going for convenience food. Now that we're seeing some better examples that you've discovered come through, some really clever micro innovations, optimizations, and that's really giving us the sense that it's more about personal resilience and homo ingeniosus, if you like, where we're being, rather than it's about sort of gluttony and thrift, it's about really clever shortcuts that are the sort of art of managing life in an imperfect work world, if you like, in this sort of landscape that we're living on with inequality and fatigue and fractured attention. Instead of that old kind of moral suspicion of convenience, it's more about ethical pragmatism, if you like, and acts of care rather than compromise are the acts of convenience. So semiotically, culturally, if you like, the meaning of convenience is now gaining one that might have just been seen for the world of luxury. Convenience is almost this new, sane, competent luxury of self-preservation. But in order for it to be seen in this heightened, more valued way, it's got to have the right adaptations. It's got to be nourishing. It's got to be high quality. So it's got to be heightened convenience, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I absolutely love the idea of stripping any connotation of things like lazy away from convenience, because actually, as you say, it's not about lazy or indulgent, it's about efficiency. There's no reason that a fast meal can't be a good meal. And I think that's really, really, really fascinating narrative.
So let's have a look at our third macrocultural trend then of streamline and strengthen. And so we've seen there's lots of uncertainty and change, but also we've got the GLP-1s really driving change here. But it's not just about that, because we're also learning lots of more information that enables us to start to take control of our health outcomes. But we need information to be safe and trustworthy. And that's really developing now as we're getting more information. It's giving us more power. And that's bringing us to think about how we might extend our lifespans to support mental as well as physical empowerment. And we're seeing also information about protein, fiber, and nutrient density, helping us understand our health spans as well as our lifespans. And some of the details around food in the fact that it can improve our gut, brain, and beauty as well. So all of this is changing really fast. So this is a really exciting area, I think, because there's lots of information now coming at us that means we can change our health outcomes. And it's not just the old things like salt, fat, and sugar. It is things like allergens, plastics, metals, and chemicals. So it's really pushing this one fast now.
I think I'd love to jump in on this one if I may, and I want to ask a question about GLP-1, and that is because the number one in our top 10 was around the GLP-1 effect, and I think it'd be useful to just get your perspective on that. I mean, clearly, these drugs are not just about appetite suppression. There's something broader going on here. It's about the fundamental rewiring, I think, about how we consume food, how we relate to food. And these GLP-1s, whether they're medicated, whether people are also seeking out sort of natural alternatives, this whole conversation feels like it's moved weight management from being something that was perhaps a bit niche and marginal, and something that was perhaps less talked about, albeit still need to talk about it with the appropriate sensitivities, but it's brought it right into the mainstream. And I suppose my question is, how is the sort of weight loss, weight management revolution changing and evolving food culture? How do we think from a sort of human and cultural perspective, what's going on in food? How is that being shifted by this as a force at more of, I guess, a human level?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we are now in what we're calling the era of appetite, because it has become one of our defining cultural frontiers of our age. I totally agree. And we once saw and understood hunger as this untamable instinct, and now we're being reprogrammed and redesigned rather than starved in order to control hunger. And it's not just the pharmacological, as you say, GLP-1s. We're also seeing digital tools, and that understanding of nutrition now that we're getting in a deep sense means we know how we can control our hunger. We're understanding that some gut biomes might be making us fatter, and that we can give ourselves new gut bacteria that might help us be thinner. And so we're learning so much that it actually means appetite's not so much now about a moral struggle. I am hearing, and I'm sure we've heard in research, that people are openly talking about being on GLP-1s and other types of tech device management. So it's not so much of a moral struggle now. It's now becoming more of a system to calibrate, food being built on biofeedback and restraint as progress, if you like. And so therefore, this is driving the food and beverage conversation towards weight loss positivity, if you like. It's about less shame around fat reduction, and more positive relationship with appetite, and the self-knowledge replacing the stigma. So that brings us to future resilience. And of course, we've got the concern about food availability and safety. We want to make our supply chains more resilient. And everything that's supporting this is actually now becoming more affordable, available, and efficient. And this changes the social and cultural conversation now. And as things become more accessible and realistic to have these lab to table offers, because they're becoming a commercial reality, it's stopping it from becoming more niche and about fanatics. It's becoming mainstream, and businesses can now accept the conversation because they can see how it actually helps their business. And a lot of things have now jumped the regulatory hurdles and the social hurdles they had, like gene editing and AI, robotics, ag tech. All of these things are now working more smoothly and easily as the business cases have been proved. And this means culturally, it's more accessible to behave in this way and talk about it. And also it means that conspicuous consumption has fallen out of favor as well.
If I might jump in on that one, the phrase conspicuous consumption is just so evocative, isn't it? I think most people, if asked, would say absolutely not, that's fallen out of favor for me. I want the green way, I want the right way, I want products that are sustainable, etc., etc., etc. I do think, though, that what we've learned over the years now is that what people say and what they do can be two different things. And in practice, when it comes to parting with their hard-earned cash, especially with the financial constraints that people are facing at the moment, what they do in action in stores, how they spend their money, doesn't always match up to what their ideals are, which are, against conspicuous consumption and so on. I guess with that being said, my question is, how do we make tomorrow's issues today's problem? How do we convince consumers to part with their hard-earned cash to go the sustainable way, the right way, to pick the greener options, even if they might be more expensive, which they often are. If things are done the right way, it's not always the cheaper way, as we know.
That's really interesting, because we actually see people understanding that reciprocal relationship almost around waste and using everything possible so as not to waste, and valuing those items, but also valuing the planet, the soil. And historically, in fact, this is very much a historic approach, which is that we always understood that you couldn't just take, there was a reciprocal relationship before industrialization of farming, and that if you took from the soil, you must give back, that you needed to rotate, you needed to have fallow periods, you composted. And that was intuitive, almost, this respect. And so the idea that you care for and the stewardship and you don't exploit or abuse was very much survival logic. And I think it's this ideology that's returning. And it also means that you bring in the sort of thrill of invention. And we can see that when it's talked about, even if we look on some of the globally successful talked about examples. I think even on Clarkson's Farm, which is, I think, one of Amazon's most successful programs ever globally, is that we see that excitement at bringing in different ways of looking after the soil. And it becomes an acceptable conversation even amongst the most cynical. And then I think what we're seeing, and you've discovered, is these sort of superhero foods where food tech has stepped up and the innovators might save the planet. And so we're seeing these engineered superfoods, if you like, demonstrating that people are excited to share.
Super fascinating. I mean, as you say, there are some problems to overcome, but necessity is definitely the mother of invention, isn't it? And if we get inventive, we can figure out how to protect our resources and thrive.
Absolutely, definitely.
And we've got a fascinating speaker, Ian Wilkinson from FarmEd, who's going to be speaking later on. He's actually going to uncover that it's probably not, clearly there are challenges to overcome, but the solutions are there, and the answers are there. It's just about how quickly we adopt them, and how as a broader food system we get behind them. So that'll Ian will bring that to life a little later on. So Amelia, I'll let you close up if that's okay.
Absolutely. I mean, yes, often people ask me this last question, which is how do I use these social and cultural trends? And what we see the most useful way is to identify where you think the food and drink trends fit into what you deliver as a customer, and then look at the drivers behind them to help you express it in a more meaningful way. And you can workshop these by bringing in the relevant ones from the detailed information that you get as a subscriber. So you can see how you can create and activate each of the opportunity areas using that social and cultural context. So that's how it all fits together in under these detailed food and beverage trends. So here we have the full wheel, which I know that you've seen in Charles's talk, and the detailed food trends underneath. So one supports the other, if you like. But if you've got any questions, please ping them on the chat and we can answer them to help you see what you might be able to use and implement in your line of work.
That's brilliant. Amelia, thank you so much for just bringing to life that deeper meaning. And certainly, I know it's your belief and very much ours as well. If you can understand the why behind what's happening, then you can develop ranges and products and services that are much more deeply engaging. So it's a critical part of the overall food and beverage trend foresight picture, is having that that human cultural layer as well. So a massive thank you on behalf of myself and Shakufa and the entire summit audience for sharing that sort of deeper level of understanding by the core from the around the core global driver, my new reality, from having fun and back to basics and streamlining strength and future resilience. So it's a great pleasure as always to welcome you to our virtual stage. So thanks so much for joining us.
Likewise, it's always a joy to see the fascinating new food and beverage trends coming through and work with you on understanding those drivers. So yes, thank you for having me back.
Good pleasure.